I'm Peter Tripp, and this is Joseph Lyons, and we're here with Mitchell Hashimoto. Um, Joseph and I work at Z Industries, building the Z editor. Mitchell Hashimoto is the founder of HashiCorp, creator of a bunch of popular dev tools, Vagrant, Packer, Terraform, etc. And in the couple of years since you left HashiCorp, you've been building a new terminal in Zig, Ghosty.
Yeah,
Is that how you say it?
yeah, that's how you say it.
Cool. Um, and the reason we've sort of, wanted to chat with you today is sort of talk about your unique approach to issue management with Ghosty. Before we get into that, can you talk a little bit about sort of your history with open source, of sort of like where you got started? Was that early in with Vagrant or before that, or?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the really abridged version, so we could get to the meat of what we want to talk about here is just basically that, I was only able to learn. I was a self-taught first programmer. I eventually got like a bachelor's degree in computer science, but I started teaching myself programming at 12, and the only way I could teach myself programming was discovering open source. And when I say open source in this sense, I mean really like source available in general, because especially when I was 12, I have no idea what this stuff was licensed. I wasn't paying attention to that. But it was just really being able to find source code to solve problems I was interested in solving and studying it. And that was my primary mechanism to learn. So that's how I got into it. And then when I started actually producing software of my own of various dubious quality, I I didn't think much of it. I sort of defaulted to open source because that was my entire world. Since then I've matured and learned a lot, and I still love and believe in open source, and obviously I'm still doing it. But that's just like the origin story of my involvement with open source.
Cool. Can you describe a little bit about like what you're doing with Ghosty that's a little different than other folks? They seem to
Sure.
make a little splash.
Yeah, and then in this, like, I'm excited to also hear from you because I think we're gonna face, I think it's very mutual. Like, my approach is definitely not perfect, and coming into this meeting, I told Richard, who helped organize this, I told him that I wanted to learn from you, and maybe we could sort of figure out what V2 of this looks like to sort of get to the right path. But so I've done I'll call it popular open source, open source with scale. I've done for a little over um, uh, 12, 13, 14 years, depending how you want to count it. I would say it's the scale at which issue management is something you have to actually have a process around versus just having a flat list of issues. It's probably been around like 12 years. And I've tried a bunch of things, and historically, I always did the normal thing on GitHub, which is that you just have issues with labels, and uh, this is pre GitHub milestones and pre a bunch of other stuff, but just did stuff like that. What I'm doing now with Ghosty, we can get into the whys of all this, but what I'm doing now with Ghosty is I'm really focusing on the issues, and when I say issues, GitHub issues, being these well-defined, actionable things, whether they're feature requests. So the feature is pretty well designed in terms of this is the config we're looking for, and this is how it'll behave across different platforms. Short of the implementation, like we don't know how to implement it, but this is what we want to make work. To bugs, which is they've already been reproduced. We know they're real. Um, they just have to be fixed, and we don't know how to fix them. And so issues are for that. And then I'm using discussions, GitHub discussions, as a triaging location. So that's where basically nobody is allowed to create a GitHub issue. GitHub doesn't let you uh, fully close off issues. So we just have we have a bunch of wording to try to
Yeah,
dissuade
I've seen
people
your
from opening
template.
ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That says
and
this
You're
is
doing
not
the
what you
wrong
want to
thing.
do.
yeah, yeah. And if someone does, one probably like one a week gets through still or something, we just close it immediately. Close it, lock it, no explanation. Like there were so many warnings in advance that like I'm not gonna even put forth the effort to explain what you did wrong. Just close it. No one's gotten mad about that yet. I mean they can't, it's locked. and then yeah, we sit in discussions and figure things out. And for bugs, it's really easy. It's just can we reproduce it? If we could reproduce it, convert to issue, and GitHub has a nice little convert discussion to issue button, makes it relatively easy. If it's a feature, like step one is like agreement that this is a good feature. If we could agree it's a good feature, we still keep it a discussion, because then step two of that discussion is okay, like what does this look like in Ghosty? And we actually do some of the feature design work in there so that when we create an issue, like I said, any contributor could come pick it up. And that's sort of the difference, that I would say that the without getting into the details, that's the big picture difference of what we're trying. And it's not perfect. I'm excited to talk about where that's not working, and how we could go from there.
Yeah, it's certainly impressive to see a project with only, you have like 100 issues and if nothing else, the number is not so high and scary, so you could conceivably review all the open issues without, a week
Yeah.
of your time or something like that. Whereas at Zed, the current number is
Yeah. What are
we're
you at? Let's
3,000
see.
and something.
we're
Okay.
under 3,000. It says 2.8K at the moment, but that's 2,850 issues,
Okay.
which is a lot and is a mix
Yeah.
of sort of a lot of historical issues that we haven't sort of closed out.
Yeah, and I've been there. I mean, I don't know what the projects at HashiCorp that I helped start are at now, but I mean, at a certain point, Terraform's been in the thousands and all that sort of stuff. And one thing I've told GitHub through feedback channels and stuff, like no one high level, just through their normal feedback and communities, but like if issues had a way to have a default filter, and that also applied to the number, I'd probably be using that instead of discussions. I think like I would prefer all of these things to land in issues, but like when you click on the issues tab, I don't want the default view to just be not useful. And if the big scary number is not so scary to me, like I don't really care if I don't I know some people judge this. I don't really go to a project and see like 5,000 issues and think, oh, that's a bad thing. I usually think like, holy shit, this
It's
project's really
popular.
popular.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what is an issue, and what there's a positive thing that's come out of the Ghosty strategy, has been that when you get a contributor, like it's not just a maintainer, when you get someone who's never worked on the project, they could open issues. And like I feel qualitatively, I haven't done any sort of quantitative analysis on this, but qualitatively, I feel that there's more contributors, first time contributors, quickly getting up and running with Ghosty, despite it being in sort of an esoteric language, despite it sort of having more advanced like issues around it in terms of like rendering and things like that, because they could just open issues and be like, all of these are fair game to work on at this point. They don't need to
Mm.
sift through thousands to find the one that I want to work on this. And then the flip side of that, which has also been very positive, is I'm getting less pull requests for issues I don't want pull requests for. So there's some times where you have like a feature request and you're just not quite sure what it's going to look like yet, or whether or bug that you're not quite sure if that behavior actually is not what you intended. And someone will open a pull request to close that issue. And then you feel kind of weird because it kind of just ends up sitting open because you're sitting in this limbo state where it works, but you're not ready to merge it because you don't know if you actually want it. And I've been able to avoid that. Like I make it very clear in the contribution guidelines that if you open a pull request without an associated issue, then I think some of the wording I use is like it may be open indefinitely. I may close it without reason. Like it's just totally up to your
Mhm.
risk whether you want to risk your time to do that. Yeah.
That's
Makes sense.
helpful. I mean, we've certainly struggled with that at Zed as well, of people open pull requests, and uh, when it's an easy fix, especially even from a new contributor, it's easy to be like, "Yep, that's just wrong. We
Yep.
can, merge your little fix." But in particular, with around design, we've had
Hmm.
folks who want something different, and certainly
Hmm.
we've struggled with even allocating the design bandwidth to even glance at a change and understand the implications and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Ha-
Yeah.
Have you, like, it sounds like you have a clear sense in your mind the difference between like a bug and a feature request. I think that's one of the things that we sometimes struggle with is the difference between, is this not working as I expect because it's broken, or not working as I expect yet? Um,
Yes. Yeah, what's the wording I use? I'm just opening it up right now because I have it right now. Yeah, feature requests, unimplemented features, bugs, malfunctioning features. That's just like the gist of what, I say. Because okay, so let me just read this. I think this will be helpful to read. Like I have this: why users cannot create issues directly. I'm just going to read one paragraph of this because I think it's like it distills it really well. I said this approach is based on years of experience maintaining open source projects and observing that 80 to 90% of what users think are bugs are either misunderstandings, environmental problems, or configuration errors by the users themselves. For what's left, the majority are often feature requests and not bugs. Of the feature requests, almost all are underspecified and require more guidance by a maintainer before being worked on. And so that's the motivating thing. It's a little bit of user blaming in there, but it's just like ends up being kind of true. And it's not like I don't want to help. There's just like there's different channels for Q&A, and we have like our project has active like moderators and stuff that read every single Q&A and everything. Like there's super helpful community. It's just that issues aren't the place for realizing that your bug is actually a config problem.
Yeah, I was curious about like how many requests and issues do you get? Like how big does your team have to be to like read all of that? Because something that we struggle with is being able to digest all the intake we get. We're doing better because we hired, but yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Let me just see how many we've gotten in the past week, just to make it simple. I think in general we get it's the launch was crazy.
mm,
Ghosty is only two months old. The launch, I mean, I think we went from zero to like over, I think it was like 600 issues, discussions within like the first few days.
yeah,
A lot of those dupes, a lot of those user errors. Right now, it looks like 2 months in, we've stabilized to around. It looks like yesterday we got about seven discussions that are open. Some might be closed, but seven. I don't think we don't close them that fast. Seven that are open. It looks like it's about like anywhere from 3 to 7 a day, I would say, which is enough like noise that would pollute the issue tracker, I would say. So it's not like insane, I think, this scale, but it's pretty loud.
makes sense.
Yeah, ours is not quite an order of magnitude, but more like 60 to 100 a week.
Yeah,
Sort of
that's yeah, it's
of
almost order of
just
magnitude.
issues, and we can sort of talk about this. We were sort of inspired by some of your work doing, and moved. We had historically had a more open sort of
Democratic process.
yeah, and sort of not quite sure all the directions we wanted to go in, and sort of give ideas a chance to bounce around and get up issues and vote on them and sort of see, you know, if you had asked one of us, I think none of us would say, rainbow brackets or a mini map in the scroll bar is the number one issue. But for a lot of people, that they're super excited about that, and
Yeah,
leaving them open, I think, has given that chance. But we have started to migrate some of those to discussions and sort of scoping down: is this an actionable feature request?
yep,
Is there questions that need to be asked? Is this, a month of engineering, or is this something that someone
yeah,
could actually pick up? And um,
yep, yeah. I think that there's also some issues where like I feel like you'll get somebody who writes a really high quality, compelling issue, whether it's a bug or feature request, just a really well written issue that you could definitely take action right away. But I feel like there's a lot where I'm unclear whether I actually want to make that change or not. Is this an n equals one or low n problem, or is this a high end problem? And so we'll keep those in discussion. And we don't have any official promise that upvotes will lead to something being implemented, but I'll like just straight up comment being like, "Thank you, really well explained. I understand what you want, and I just want to see if others also want this first." And I'll just sort of I'm going to keep this as a discussion for a while. And there's a bunch of stuff like that I'm just like waiting to see whether it's important to people. But it's not a problem, especially for my side. It's not a there's no like commercial entity behind it. It's totally a volunteer project. So I make extra clear that me and the other contributors who work on this, we're going to do what we want, and you also have the power to do what you want. So, uh, you know, pull requests are there. Or like honestly, with this project, more than I used to be really I used to be really not possessive, but I used to be really defensive around trying to satisfy everyone to prevent sort of fragmentation in the community. And with this project, I've been much more open to just saying, look, if you want this pull request merged, like maintain your own fork. That's something I'm offering you. Like I'm not saying that in a mean way. It's just like I don't know when I'm going to get to this. I don't even know if I want this. And this is sort of my project, so forking is like fine. Like it's the same burden you're asking me. Like if I merge, then I'm maintaining that feature. I'm just asking you to maintain your own feature. It's like the same. We're asking for the same burden for different people. Yeah,
has anyone taken you up on that and sort of maintained
kind of.
forks? Or,
On the big feature stuff, and I think it's working brilliantly. Like people wanted Ghosty to work with Pure Wayland. There's a group of people that are working on a Windows port. Like Windows is on the roadmap, but I've made it clear that Windows is like lower priority than some of the other stuff. And so I might not even get to it this year. I've made that really clear. And I've said, but it would be great if someone started a fork right now. Maybe we could talk about upstreaming that next year. I don't know, but like that would help. There's, a bunch of you that want to work on it, and that's sort of starting up. um, there is one highly opinionated user that maintains a fork with his own tweaks that he feels are better defaults and better like behavioral changes. And like, I think that's perfect. I'm like,
Yeah.
it works. It's rare, right? It's rare, but at least like I feel like I'm more open to saying that's an option.
Would you say that I'm sort of curious also, in particular about the language choice here of like previously, like when you wrote Vagrant, that was in Ruby,
Ruby, yeah,
and then most of the other HashiCorp stuff was in Go.
right.
Was it all in Go? Was there anything you guys did in anything else? Um,
The flagship open source projects were all in Go. I mean,
right.
internally commercial stuff. We had a
Oh,
bunch of languages, but yeah,
yeah. I mean, obviously, if you're creating a UI for Terraform, Enterprise, that's going to be not just Golang, but
yeah, yeah.
Um, one of the things that I think is sort of interesting for us is given that we're in Rust and most software engineers don't code Rust, even if they're sort of excited about it, I think we sometimes draw interest from folks who are interested in contributing to a Rust code base.
Yes,
And um, I wonder if you've had a similar experience with Zig, where Zig has had some buzz and people are liking some of the ergonomics, at least in theory, and sort of. Have you found that that is a way that attracts potential contributors?
definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's more extreme with Zig. There's less of a interest base. I mean, I think like Rust is so popular that obviously the pool of first timers is humongous. But for Zig, it's much smaller pool, but also like the number of real projects that exist in Zig is also minuscule compared to Rust. So, I mean, I think that we've definitely gotten a lot of people that are just trying to do right Zig for sure.
Yeah, and it certainly seems more accessible than the other big one is what Turtle, or it's the accounting software, the double
Oh,
Tiger
Tiger
Beetle.
Beetle.
Tiger
Yeah.
Beetle, not yeah.
Yeah, there's
Uh,
basically a Tiger Beetle, Bun, the JavaScript runtime. There's a new Light Panda. It's like kind of a new browser that's being worked on, like headless browser. It's being worked on. There's a ZML, which is like an AI. If you're into AI, like it's basically PyTorch but written in Zig. Um, Man, I hope I'm not offending anyone. I'm missing some stuff in there, but there's of the projects that are like relatively large. There are few. River is a Wayland compositor. Yeah,
One of the
but
things that
I
I
could
think
list them. I could list them right now.
exactly, I
Um,
certainly can't. I
and
can't even list our dependent crates, let alone.
yeah, and what's funny is Go used to be this way too. I mean, when we started the first HashiCorp projects, like Packer was the first one. I could list the Go projects that were big. Like at a certain, there was like a point in time. It was short because it blew up in popularity pretty quickly, thanks to mostly Docker, I think. But there's like a short window of time where if you ordered like top 10 GitHub projects by stars and Go, I think me or the HashiCorp repo had 8 out of 10. And like that's how small that community was.
Mm.
So I like get those same vibes like that. I'm in that same thing right now where I feel like there's there's just such a small pool of Zig projects right now.
Do you think there are things in Zig that were uniquely suited for this, or sort of are been unique challenges from a community perspective? Like one of the things that uh, contributing to Zed is somewhat hard, I think, because some of our data structures are foreign to folks, and so
Mm,
learning a foreign data structure and our access patterns for that on top of learning a new language is it can be a lot for some people. Certainly is for me as I dive into different parts of the code base. You sort of go like, oh, this is not just off the shelf. This is not just a self-contained thing. There's
yeah.
um, has that been an experience that you guys have had, or is it more sort of like the terminal is more of a solved problem, and so you're solving it in good ways rather than some novel way or something like that?
Um, I mean, I don't think it's any different from any other project, I guess. I think there's parts of the project that are extremely complicated, lean more to the novel side, and then there's other parts that are more approachable. I mean, I think more so than any other project I've worked on, at least, and this might lead to the contributors. and I think Zed, would apply to this as well, is that there's more diverse subsystems to this project than ever before. Like if you were contributing to Vault or Terraform, like it's pretty much all the same thing unless you get to the plugin side, like the provider sort of infrastructure side of things. But like the core product's pretty much all the same, with like same expertise. With Ghosty, it's like we need experts that know Metal, that know OpenGL, that know Mac OS GUI frameworks, that know Linux, X11 versus Wayland's like APIs, that know keyboard input and layout and translation. They know, all the like more than that. There's many more than that, but like there's such a diverse thing where I've told people like if you're a ex video game hobbyist that you just know like OpenGL really well and you don't know anything else, like you could ignore everything else and still make a huge impact on this project. And personally, I actually haven't really had any projects I've been involved with that have been that way, and that's been kind of neat to have.
It's cool. I think the other thing for me, and I'm not looking at Zed. One of the things is that Zed is a massive project that sort of
Yeah,
serves so many different users, and that we're trying to be an editor not just for one language. We're pretty good at editing Rust because we
makes
dog food it,
sense. Yeah,
but that certainly, as you go further and further from the center, the experience is different, and uh, I wonder about sort of like the use case for us. One of the things that we sort of struggle with is people come in as experts in their domain and are
yeah,
assuming that the people they're talking to are also experts in their domain.
yeah,
And uh, you know, you can have great issue templates that sort of steer people towards this is what we're looking for. These are the type of steps we need to reproduce. These are, you know, I've taken to saying not the explain like I'm a toddler, but basically assume I have a blank laptop with Z installed. How did you get to this problem?
no,
Um,
yeah,
and people struggle. It's a
yeah,
fascinating thing that like for people who are already software engineers, they struggle with actually communicating
yeah,
the issue they're having in an effective way.
Mhm.
Um,
for
and
sure. I have the same thing. I mean, I tell people, I say with bugs all the time, like I assume I just installed Ghosty and I have no other software. The big one I get is people assuming I know how to use Tmux, which ironically I'm awful at Tmux. So like I've never used a multiplexer. So yeah, whenever I get like a Tmux like bug that happens in Tmux, they're like, "Here's my Tmux config. Go ahead." I'm like, "No, that's not enough for me. Like, I need to know the key presses you
Yeah.
press to make this happen because I have no idea how to use this tool." But I mean, yeah, I mean, I think going beyond that, I think one thing that's pretty cool, and I'm guessing Zed does this as well, is like we moved to like a subsystem maintainer model. If I were in Zed's shoes, I would probably, split by teams in terms of employment, of spheres of responsibility, I guess. Like looking back at when I was at HashiCorp, even at like to the point that I left, you basically just had like the like Vault open source team or like the core team or like the Terraform core team. And it was just like one group of people. And then you had like providers. Like there was a few other things, but they were like not very diverse. And I feel like the way getting on the back on the topic of sort of issues, the way I've been able to scale some of this stuff is appointing these subsystem maintainers and like recognizing myself personally that like they know more about these subsystems, the topics than I do. I may know more about the implementation in Ghosty, but they know more about the actual topic, and that's been super helpful because yeah, we could get to a resolution really quickly of how things work, and that's true. That's pretty much true across every part of Ghosty because me having to work on the whole product for 2 years by myself, I became like pretty good at all the areas, but never, I'm like jack of all trades, master of none is what ended up happening after 2 years. Like I know enough metal to render things, but I don't know enough metal to write the best metal code that's out there. And extrapolate that to literally everything else. And so I think that's been super helpful to have. Is I feel like I'm just guiding sort of the big picture stuff, but like for us, our subsystem maintainers they can merge code and accept. They could design roadmap without my approval. I'm not like a roadblock to them. I have like a veto power, but I haven't used it yet. And yeah, that's just sort of how I'm trying to scale the project.
And are these people that you've like known prior, or are they just people that you met through working on Ghosty?
Every single person is not someone I knew prior. Every single person is someone that emerged though through the beta, the private beta.
Yeah.
The
Cool.
public part hasn't been out long enough that I think those people haven't really emerged yet. But yeah, they've all come through the private beta, and yeah, I mean, it's like I think it's like the positive when open source works model is like we have a especially I don't know actually I wouldn't say especially I don't know why this is the case with Ghosty. I was gonna say especially because we use Discord, but I actually don't know if it's Discord that does this. But I like really don't know anything about the people that are our subsystem maintainers. Like I struggle even like knowing. Thankfully, Discord makes it a little easier, but like I don't know pronouns. I don't know their real names. They're all pseudonyms. I don't know their locations. I don't know anything about these people. And it's sort of like open source working at its best, right? Like that none of that matters to me because the work they do and the knowledge they have and the kindness they exude in the community, like that's enough for me. Like I don't need to know anything else about you. Um, so that's really nice, but I don't know.
One of the areas that I've sort of found myself wanting is like a almost like a CRM for open source contributors of like being able to track people because there are folks who are prolific. This item is 1 pixel off to the side. They're prolific sort of really minor issues and not doing a lot of contribution. And every once in a while, someone shows up and you're like, oh, this is an important person who's using Zed who in fact is reporting an important problem. They wouldn't be here if they weren't doing that,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
or you find out that they were a contributor, and I don't know all the contributors of Zed, but like every once in a while, I'll see an issue and somebody will, oh yeah, they wrote this subsystem, and you're like, oh,
yeah, yeah, for sure. I there was an input bug, Japanese language input bug for Linux that we were trying to chase down. And someone responded, and it was a nice detailed response, and I kind of pushed it to the side. And then when I went back and looked at that bug like a month later, I realized that person was the author of the Japanese input method on Linux. And I was like, oh, like I didn't I just didn't respond immediately. I didn't I totally respected what they said. I just didn't respond immediately. But if I knew that, I definitely would have been like, oh shit, like I need to pay attention to this right now because like this is the single like foremost global expert on this problem and they're outlining what I'm doing wrong. And so yeah, some of that would help. I actually more so than the positive sides, the negative sides are what I want to know more about actually. It's like I actually wish I knew like is this person banned in any other communities?
mm.
And for what reason? Like I almost want like it's a scary line, but because it almost gets into like a social credit score type
Hmm.
ethical concern. But I really want to know like I 10 years of open source. I know that these like kind of very toxic people tend to come in nice and then like blow up at a certain point. And I just want to know whether I should expect that. I'm not trying to like block them immediately. Like I'm willing to engage with everyone pretty much. And there's a few people in our community that some people have warned me, oh, they've been banned from this. And I'm like, well, they're not banned here yet. So let's just like see what happens. And so I'm like willing to engage, but like I just want to know whether I should be like on guard, basically.
Or at least
Yeah.
is this a your first offense? We're going to be very clear about
True.
what's going on as opposed to just like nudging.
True.
And we've struggled with that as well, of sort of if somebody is just chatting in Discord and is sort of off the cuff, what is the it's like, this is off topic,
Yeah.
okay, this is very not much about Zed, okay, and uh and it's
Yeah.
interesting. Some folks, again, if you respond sort of providing that, hey, here's our code of conduct, this is sort of out of bounds, they
Yeah.
sort of tighten up. And then other folks, it turns out, will be serial repeaters of that sort of
Yeah.
out of bounds,
Yeah.
or find
Luckily, we've
ways
had
around
very little
bans.
of like really bad offenders. We've had very little, so
Nice.
Good to
I,
know.
I feel that way about my whole open source career too. It's been like such a tiny minority. It's
hmm
not. It doesn't keep me up at night. The off topic thing is funny in Discord. So we as part of the public release, we like got rid of pretty much all our topical channels. We used to have all sorts of random things and off topic, especially in general chat, and we got rid of all of that. And the it's in our rules, but like the phrase I use whenever someone starts going off topic is I say this is not church. Um, is basically like this isn't a social community. This isn't a place where you could talk about anything and you're welcome here. It's like we're talking about terminals, we're talking about Ghosty. If you want to talk about something else, go find their community. This is not church. This is Ghosty's thing, you know. And that's worked really well, actually. That's worked really well.
So, roughly, like, how big is your sort of community? Like, I mean, I don't even number.
Good
One of the
question.
things that's sort of interesting to me is I've only been at Zed for 8 months now. Joseph's been here longer. He was, been doing community and sort of some of this issue and outreach work for a lot longer than I have. But um, I've been sort of blown away by how big it is and
Hmm.
um, how that if we continue to be successful, assumably that will scale. Just as like I'm
Yeah.
sure when
Daunting.
Terraform was first out, people were into it, but then 3 years later, it's a whole nother universe where when you become the de facto platform for a lot of this work, and
Yeah. Uh,
you're reaching a lot more people who are expecting something different. Um,
Yeah, I mean, Ghosty right now, our Discord's about 33,000. And GitHub community, it's hard to know. I mean, I don't know. We have like 25,000 stars or something, which is okay. I think that, yeah, I think it's very overwhelming, and it's very overwhelming uh, in my experience when I was at HashiCorp, because there was this commercial entity behind it, that I felt like I think there is, like, I think Zed probably does have like a larger obligation to those users, because they're kind of like not just users, they're either actually customers or potentially future customers for whatever Zed ends up doing for their like long-term business model. And so I definitely felt like a lot more pressure to please people, and that I'm not feeling as much with this project, but that definitely just continues to grow. And I really feel like what I'm trying to do with this project is based on what I learned at HashiCorp, where I feel like we didn't scale that community management right. And I think part of it was like I personally tried to keep too tight a grip on the projects, but then over time as a company, I think we tried to keep too tight a grip on the projects. And yeah, it's kind of messy. Like right now, you asked for, like, besides the user scale, for that, 33,000 people in Discord, and then extrapolate that to GitHub type scale. We have something like 10 mods in Discord, and then all community. And then we have, I think, 9 subsystem maintainers across like 4 or 5 subsystems. Some are on multiple teams, but that's pretty much what we have. All of us are pretty active on the discussions in terms of labeling things and triaging and things like that.
Makes sense.
And we're
Yeah, it's
not
a
yeah,
like
lot.
on top of it. I mean, I think we're doing pretty good, but it's not like we're at zero waiting for feedback. Like there's probably hundreds that we still need to get to right now.
And you did say you answer basically everything that comes through as long as it kind of meets the requirements of not being auto closed.
Eventually,
Yeah.
eventually, yes, yes, yes. Like we're not. Oh, the one like pattern. I don't know if that does this. So if you do, I'm not trying to offend you, but the one pattern that drives me absolutely crazy across the open source community is this like idea of a stale bot. Um, that drives me totally crazy. I would say stale bot without conditions. I've seen a couple projects do it right, where you have a label which is like waiting for feedback, and the moment anyone comments, that automatic like another bot just gets rid of that. Um, like that's the stale bot only closes things that are waiting for feedback over a certain period of time. Like that's totally reasonable to me. That's something I just do manually, but I could imagine doing that automatically. But the ones where like I've had open issues where they're like, we haven't heard from you in 2 months, and it's like, because you haven't done anything in 2 months, not because I haven't done anything in 2 months. So yeah, that kind of stuff drives me crazy.
yeah, we've struggled with some of that, and I think the other thing that, given that we haven't taken the time to really go through the entirety of the backlog and sort of dig through every single issue,
Yeah,
given the velocity of Zed in the last year, I mean, like, been open source for 13 months or something like that.
yep,
Um, if someone was like, "Hey, I want this feature," and we may not have seen the feature request, we may have just implemented it, and
yeah,
so
yeah,
there is an element of the sort of staleness, or this was broken, and it's like, yeah, we totally refactored that.
Yep.
even if we can identify that it was a problem, it wasn't necessarily like it wasn't a big problem or it was, a little corner case. Um, but yeah, it's
Yeah, I'm looking at the dead issues right now. I'm kind of like
Just
browsing through them. Your pull requests are crushing it though. 102. That's really good given your scale.
I think
Um,
that is the thing is we merge and I was going to ask you about this. So like one of the things that I think is really different about Zed, and we sort of try to onboard people into this both in the community and as employees start is we are not PRs are not the place for reviewing code and architecture and choices. It makes sense sometimes to review PRs, but in general, um, you'll if you look at a lot of our PRs, there's not a review. I would say a tiny fraction of the internal PRs have any review. And what we go for instead is we oftentimes pair on these things. So internally, two people will collaborate on something. And if you have something where you're unsure of the design, work with someone. And, it obviously these sort of small PRs being willing to revert all these things, move the ball forward. But it really is a very different place than anywhere else I've ever worked in that regard. That we sort of assume that amongst the staff, people are going to ask for help if they need it. And we've also seen a huge um, there are a few folks on staff at Zed who pair with members of the community. So Conrad, in particular, most of the Vim integration that we've built up has been he's built a lot of it. But also, when someone shows up and says, "Hey, I want this obscure Vim feature," he says,
mm,
"Great, here's my Calendly link. Let's
nice,
pair."
nice.
And it removes the need for the async conversation where you have
Hmm.
to fully scope out all the different corner cases of how this feature works. If you've got multiple lines selected, if you've got multi-cursor, what happens here, what are your expectations? And I've found it really helpful because it removes the need to do so much of the sort of like justification up front. And it's like, code the solution. Let's see if that makes sense. And that doesn't always translate to members of the community because some of them will, take things down their own path. But it has allowed us internally and when working with folks to sort of cultivate a different style of review where we're not just spend, at previous jobs I could spend 30%, 30, 40% of my time reviewing other people's PRs,
Yeah,
responding to their, comments, bike shedding, you know, asking me to do something. And then it turns out, oh, that was just a suggestion. I didn't mean actually change it. I meant,
yeah, yeah,
how
yeah.
do you
That's
guys handle code review?
um. There's definitely a review that happens. This is sort of I mean, I think if it fixes the problem well, and I just run it. I run it myself. There's tests. Obviously, we have a pretty, expensive CI. We run like 60 different platform tests for every building on Nix, building with every Linux distro, building with like a matrix because we rely on downstream package ecosystems. We have to support like a matrix of this version of GTK versus this version of OpenGL versus whatever. So we run this like huge matrix test. So if those pass, that's a really good sign. But then I just am curious if it works. So I'll just download it, run it, and if it works for me, then I trust the CI for everything else, and I just sort of merge it. I'm definitely picky about some code stuff, but only if it's touching, I would say, certain subsystems. If it's fully self-contained in like GTK and the GTK subsystem people approve it, then it just gets merged. Like they merge it, I don't merge it, and that's fine with me. But if it like starts going into like I recognize code paths where I'm like, that is like the hot path in a terminal. Like I'm gonna really look at that line by line because like that's where all our performance comes from or something. Then I get really nitpicky. But yeah, um, yeah, I'm like, I think what's interesting about issues is like looking at yours because we have sort of similar things. It's like it feels like there's like uh the same like not categories, but the same taxonomy of labels that every project needs to have. It sort of you have like the broad category, bug, feature, crash, things like that. And then you sort of have the subsystem. I see you have like key maps, terminal,
different
like
levels of granularity, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I consider that like a subsystem granularity, and then I think there's sort of like the does it reproduce or not yet is sort of
Yeah.
like the thing, and then we also have like does it still need design? We have a needs design label,
Hmm.
um, and then we have milestones. We use milestones. The milestones will actually put it on a roadmap, which is like pretty last step of everything, or like it's already an issue, and beyond being an issue, we've also said this is definitely going in with this release, or not definitely, but 95% chance it's going in this release. And then the thing that I don't know if you guys, I don't see it immediately in the first few pages at least, but something we've talked about is like we we haven't implemented this is we sort of do want this like priority system where it's sort of like um it's not on the roadmap, it's not in the next release, but when you have this many things, is it like a high priority, is it like do we use numbers, do we use whatever, is it like P1, P2, P3, in terms of just like there's no dates associated with that, just like in the grand scheme of things, if all things were equal, like we would prefer to work on this first or something. That's something we're still
Hmm.
talking about.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing that is a little different about Zed is um, there's a lot of work that actually occurs that isn't directly issue driven. In that, and sometimes that's small things, but oftentimes it's incremental work towards a larger goal.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
yeah,
and
yeah.
we uh, we sort of it's available if you open Zed and went to the Zed channel tree. We have a number of sort of public little notes channels, and so oftentimes like our internal hit list for a release is just this a markdown list of all the little bugs that we know need fixing, and it's one of those things that I've struggled with any issue tracking system is what is the right granularity for an issue, and how do you track things that are too small
Hmm.
for an issue? Is it like a single issue that has check mark items in it, or is it
Yeah,
um but
I've
I think people have struggled with that of we don't necessarily have an issue for tracking your problem, but it's like we know.
yeah, yeah, I've tried to like I try to view granularity of issues in terms of like what I think a pull request should close at least one issue. And so like would you accept a pull request to close this issue, like, or if you wouldn't because it's too small, like you're not doing enough, then I think that should merge issues together. So like a really practical example that I sort of made a mistake on was there was one for Ghosty to accept configuration files within the standard like system level XDG config paths. We respect the home ones, but we don't do like the system config paths, and
Mm,
it's still open currently. But I originally said let's break down this problem into something simpler. And I said, step one, we should have a way to iterate through the system level configures. And then step two, we should use that in our config loader. And we already have merging functionality, so we should take advantage of that, blah, blah. And someone took that because that's what I said. And they opened a PR to create an iterator over the XCG directories. And it was fine. The code was fine. And then I started like implementing the rest of it on top of it. And I was like, actually, like we don't need an iterator. Like this was the wrong, I over specified this issue because you need to really work on the problem to understand what you actually need, and I wasn't. And because I broke it out into a separate issue, they made a pull request to close that, which is true, but then I ended up rejecting it and apologizing and being like, actually this issue's closed. That's not a real issue. The real issue is loading these config files, and I actually, without working on it, I haven't worked out. I was like, I don't know the right way to do it, but if it's an iterator, let's add that iterator back in that PR, but I don't know if it is. So yeah, I think like my granularity is like PR to close an issue, at least one.
yeah, that's definitely not the case for us. Internally, there's a lot of, I think it's also, it steps to a lot of how we work as we have people who are not in charge of various subsystems, but certainly have areas of expertise over
Hmm.
a particular subsystem, but we don't have the same static sort of these people are focused on this is what they do. And I think part of that is just we're new and growing and whatnot, but the there are a lot of things that are just sort of like small fixes that people just sort of discover, and sometimes they file an issue, but sometimes it's just in trying to reproduce the issue, you discover what the issue is,
Fix it. Yeah.
and then you fix it. If you look at the Z history, and this predates me, you can see sort of the reflection of that. Of in the early days, I think everybody just committed to main, and they weren't using PRs, and so like for the first
That's wild.
a long it is, and it's wild for to imagine this wasn't
I
just a
make
single
PRs.
person.
I make PRs on single person project, like private single person. It scares me. So I don't know.
But it also is just a different sort of angle of if you just review if you think about things as like, we can revert, we're willing to revert
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah.
and, that the velocity itself is important of sort of, and I think
Yeah. I'm
certainly,
not
like,
saying it's wrong. It's just very interesting. Is
it's
what.
fast. I couldn't I mean, I would love to have
Yeah, we
peered
just
Yeah.
back through time.
we just implemented like not being able to like write to main how many months ago? Like
It was right before Christmas of when we
Nice.
enabled branch protection for main, and
Nice.
we it was, the last one corner case of when we do a release, how do you push the new version number,
Yeah.
like
Mhm.
the little corner case, that but prior to that, it's like, no, you can push to main, you
Yep.
shouldn't, but I think it comes from a like, uh, and certainly like as you have a better test suite, you want to be able to
Yeah.
run it, and you want to be able to rely on that. You want to be able to, know that that's happening, especially with outside contributors.
I feel like with GUI apps, we're both GUI apps. Like I feel like there's an unsafe amount of testing in production that has to happen. And maybe it's not production actually, but like there's a pretty good sizable community that's just running off. We generate builds off of every commit on main, and they are hooked into auto update mechanisms, and also so like it's pretty low effort to run those. And uh, I feel like it's not a high percentage, but I feel like that feedback is so critical. Like if we didn't have those, we call those builds tip builds because they're per commit. They're not nightlies or anything. We just call them tip builds. And if we didn't have the tip community running, like there's a bunch of stuff that would just slip through because yeah, you could like spin up VMs and run the app and click through it and take screenshots. It's like it's just so much infrastructure, so slow, and so much cost to be able to do that that like we haven't set it up or tried to set it up. And yeah, there's just like some stuff I'll merge something and then it'll be like I'll merge a change to some subsystem and then someone be like, oh yeah, Japanese input broke from that. I'm like, what? Like how did that happen? And yeah, it's stuff like that. Like you could only really catch through these users
We
testing it.
similarly have, that, we internally run nightly, like a nightly build, which is not public. We're not hiding it. But
Hmm.
from a support perspective,
Yeah.
it's also, I don't want someone reporting an issue necessarily for something that, because oftentimes it's like, oh, the person who merged it,
Yep.
we reported it internally, they're working on it. We don't necessarily
Yep.
need, and again, I imagine it'll be different as we scale. Of sort of the need for passive communication is greater, and sort of the accountability of what was that, how did that break? Maybe you want to have an issue with every PR, but uh, that absolutely those early users are so key. Of like they just notice when that my first contribution to Zed was exactly that. I built from source, and something was broken with Lua that wasn't broken the day before, and I was like, there it is. You broke it. um,
Yep.
and we have dual release channels where we cut a preview branch from main on Wednesdays, and then
Nice.
um, that's publicly distributed. People can run that in parallel. You can run both stable and main, and then a week later that sort of goes out. And
Yeah.
luckily I imagine as we have some more corporate customers or something, we may have longer life cycles. Weekly updates is pretty aggressive for a lot of folks.
Yeah.
Hmm.
But it also means that we don't have to support and backport lots of changes. We can backport the work, hotfix on
Yep.
stable, the worst of stuff that didn't get caught in preview, but not having to, oh, we're supporting two LTS versions, back 6 months, making a choice, and you're like, that depends upon other stuff. I think we've lucked out in some of that, of sort of as we keep moving pretty quickly. Um, but it's
That's the
certainly
uh that's the fun part about for me of getting away from owning releases. Is like one of the it's really not controversial. It's really standard open source, but one of the some people don't like it. One of the stances I made with Ghosty is that I don't do any distribution except for Mac, because Mac, requires $99 a year,
Authorization.
like, yeah, all that stuff. And so I'll do Mac, and it's more expected on Mac. But like Linux, day one when we publicly released, there was no binaries. Like, you got to build from source. And then I was like, I built a packaging guide, and I was like, I'll work with package maintainers to do this, and they've been amazing. That package management community is really amazing. But it's pros and cons. One, I don't have to deal with releases. Two, I never have to backport anything. That falls onto the package maintainer. If they want to pull a thing back into, they can't upgrade for any reason, like, package maintainers maintain patches. And But three, like, the con side, moving to the con side, is that you know there's a group of people working heroically to get Ghosty into, like, the next version of, like, Ubuntu and Debian, like, like, official repos, and it's going well. We're getting there, but the problem is, when we're in there, say version 1.3 gets in there, 1.3 is going to be in there for 2 years. So, like, it better be pretty good, because, like, you can't. Yeah, we'll always have, like, community maintained, like, PPAs and stuff where you get the latest version, but, like, for the average Jane Joe user, apt install Ghosty, they're going to get a release in 2027 from 2025. And so it better be pretty good. And there might be some backports that the package community puts in there, but, like, it's a weird thing where I don't need to think too much about backporting, but I need to think really hard about, like, I'm actively trying to put together, on paper, on notes, like, I'm trying to put together a timeline of when different distros ship LTS releases, because I need to think about my release schedule around them to be like, okay, if 1.2 might actually end up being the LTS release for Debian, then I shouldn't ship the crazy experimental feature in that one. I should, like, make sure that's solid, wait till they feature freeze on the packages, and then ship that in 1.3 or something, because then I have 2 years to figure this out, and get into the next one. So it's kind of weird. I've never thought about things that way before, but at the same time, I'm totally free of the other stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, we've had that a little bit with the minimum supported Rust version and a few distributions where
Mm, yep.
we generally adopt new versions of Rust within days of them being stable, and that's
Yep.
just sort of, we want to use the features, but from a maintainer's perspective, it's like they get new versions of Rust maybe once a year, every
Yeah.
18
Yeah. I do
months.
that.
Um, and it's been a start. We just sort of said, we want the latest bits. We want to be able to, we don't want to limit what we can do. We want to be able to support. And similarly, we don't want to require you to run an old version of a compiler. I think we've all maintained software that was locked with some old version, and it was, its own mess.
Yep.
But it's a challenge for package
Yeah.
maintainers if they don't have the version of Rust we run. It's like, oh, you're just going to
That's
have stuck with Zed
that's
from September.
That's pretty much happening right now. It's like, Zig they're about to release 0.14, and there's a really excited group of contributors that, I said we could make the issue, we could plan a migration, but, you know, a- yeah, Nix gets 0.14 within a couple days, but exactly, there's going to be Debian, things like that. Luckily, we're not in those repos yet, so I sort of compromise, being like, we don't need to care about Debian because we're not even there yet. So if we had to care, we're probably totally screwed. But since we don't care, we could probably get onto the latest version within 3 months, I think. But um, yeah, like, in the future, we're gonna be way behind on like Zig versions, and that's really scary for us because Zig is such a fast changing language. It's gonna be kind of wonky, I think. So we'll see how that goes. I'm used to it on the front end side, like Mac OS. We support every supported Apple OS version. Linux, we're still formalizing a policy, but still, like, we support, basically, our informal policy right now is whatever Debian 12 ships is, the current LTS Debian is our lowest supported version of GTK and all the other libraries that we have, because they tend to be the most conservative. But yeah, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of runtime version detection that we have to build, and the GTK team is already the subsystem team is talking about like maintaining different UI files by version. Like there's no way within a UI file to branch on version. So
Hmm.
you either need to do it all in C or C API and programmatically. But if you want to like have like, the XML based like GUI
Sure,
editor
the
UI, like
resources that you're going
yeah,
to use.
they're like considering just making a UI folder that literally has like 4.15, 4.16, 4, and duplicating the files and the different views that because we support like, literally like Mac OS doesn't have this problem because there's 20 years of GUI history that we could like fall back on. Like they've had tab bars for like decades, but on Linux, like literally like tab overview appeared in the last 6 months. Like that feature just disappears if you're at runtime if you're using an older version. So yeah, it's kind of crazy that I think we're going to get in this place where like massive features won't exist unless you're on like a within the past 12 months version of
Yeah.
your operating system, not of Ghosty. Yeah.
Hmm. I, so that we don't have a lot of time, but I wanted to sort of transition us into the future of sort of libghosty,
Yeah.
and the potential of that of like um, a lot of what you're describing is also going to be, I hadn't even considered it, but if you're supporting libghosty in the future on these platforms, you're similarly like there's a longer lifespan of a library than of a traditional application.
hmm
Um, and sort of what is your thinking about that, and how like what's the sort of path forward with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's so the libghosty, yeah, the binary compatibility we're gonna have to be really careful about is the C ABI compatibility. And I've been studying a lot of C libraries, in addition to just we consume a lot of C libraries in our Zig code base, but just studying a lot of C libraries. And I mean, I think, I want to move forward as much as possible to just, opaque types that let me, you know, do whatever, change layouts and things like that, as long as everything is sort of coherent. That doesn't work everywhere, and there's performance issues. There's a lot of heap allocation to deal with that, stuff like that. So, like one of the tricks I do right now is we have a system in libghosty because macOS is already a libghosty consumer. We have a system where when the core of Ghostly needs to send a one-way message with data to the application. So this would be like the title changed of the window, or the user is requesting the window closes, or the user is requesting a tab moves 4 tabs to the left, or something. Like it's basically a one-way message. Like we don't need to know it was successful, but you need to know that you should try to do it. Um, we have this one unified callback system to do it, so you don't have to have like 10 callbacks. We send a tag and then a union of the possible data, and the tag specifies what's in the union. And so one of the tricks I'm planning on doing with libghosty for this binary compatibility is just putting an artificially large union element in there that's unused, and just to make sure we always have that byte space in case we ever need to introduce new data elements. And then of course, we're going to run into like the Bill Gates RAM problem, where eventually we're going to be like, oh yeah, 512, that's going to be good enough for any future action, and then we're going to
How
hit
many
it, and then
messages could I possibly want? How
yeah,
many different stuff?
how much data could I possibly send over this interface? But that's like, we're just gonna have to do tricks like that we don't have to worry about with like the Zig API, for
Yeah.
example. Yeah,
I definitely have long memories of some of the. I used to be a Solaris admin, and
nice.
they supported an ABI that went back forever. If you
hmm
had software that ran on Solaris, you could, Linux had you can recompile it and it'll probably work. And Solaris was the proprietary world. And so you could take a Solaris binary
Binary. Wow.
from 20 years ago, and there might be some sharp corners of usernames might be longer than you expected them to be, or various other
Yeah,
sort of invariants that were violated, but that practically speaking, they held true to that line. And it's one of the reasons that so many people ran it for so long is even your commercial software continued to operate
yeah,
even as the vendor went away. You could still use it and you could still run it exactly as you had before. And
yeah. That's
it's an
amazing.
impossibly high standard to hold yourself
Yeah,
to.
yeah. Yeah, I'm not doing that. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people ask like, why haven't you just released libghosty if it's like, the macOS, it's clearly like production ready, real world ready, if like the macOS app actually uses it. And the big reason is like I don't want to commit to compatibility. Since the app and the lib are shipped as a single binary in lockstep right now, I break that interface all the time. It's not a big deal, but I have to not do that anymore. So yeah.
Exciting.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be too bad, but it'll be a like I think that the time that we're stabilizing libghosty through actually using it, I think we'll end up on something where I feel pretty comfortable with like this is a pretty good interface, and then we just have to analyze the parts we want to future proof a little bit, and I feel okay about it. But famous last words, who knows?
Library commitments are a long time, and
Yeah, yeah.
they'll outlive your interest in the project for sure.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've been very transparent that I'm like, I don't plan on working on this thing forever. So, that's part of my like, I want to promote these subsystem maintainers and build this sort of over time. I don't need to like boil the ocean from day one and create a whole governance structure and things like that. But like, I'm trying to just slowly put the pieces on the board so that one day I could step away and it'll be in a really healthy spot.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think thank you for your time. It's been really interesting to speak with you, and I'm excited about um, Ghosty and libghosty, and we're looking forward to a stabilization of libghosty and seeing where that goes.
Yeah,
Can we get that on the terminal dot app?
I
I saw
know.
that tweet.
No, no, unlikely. But yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I hope Zed could use Ghosty at some point if there's interest. And I'm also just like, if as you iterate on your issue management and figure stuff out, I'd love to hear how that works and things like that. Yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Appreciate it. Thank
Thank
you.
thanks.
you so much for your time. You have a good day.